Askreddit. Lawyers of Reddit. What's the dumbest thing you've had to explain to a client? By far and away the strangest thing I have ever had to explain to a client is how to use an elevator. Our courtroom was on the 4th floor, and she needed to take an elevator to get there. I had to describe how you get in, push the 4, and then get out when the lights above show she's on floor 4. Yeah. The dumbest legal thing I've had to explain is that you can't terminate your parental rights voluntarily and then request visitation with that child. No, you dingus. Self-defense does not mean he punches you in the face and then 2 weeks later you go to his house, ring his doorbell, and kick the shit out of him. I watched a FL Supreme Court appeal over a murder case. The guy killed several people with a baseball bat and wanted his sentence mitigated because he had PTSD. He claimed he had PTSD from experiencing the murder he committed. The court had to explain to him that a mental issue acquired while committing a crime cannot mitigate the crime you committed. I once had to explain to a client that he could, in fact, fire an employee for 1. Stealing significant sums of money from the safe, 2. Pulling a gun on a co-worker who questioned these activities, and 3. Waving said gun in a customer's face moments later, all of which were on camera. In my state we have this thing called victims' compensation. An oversimplification of how it works goes as follows. If you are the victim of a crime and suffer some form of injury, for instance psychological, physical, etc., you can apply for a payment from state funds. If you are the perpetrator of one of those crimes, for instance an assault, robbery, pedophilia, etc., an order can be made for you to pay the state back an amount relating to that victim's compensation. I had a client who felt the process of being convicted for assaulting his relatives and having to pay victims' compensation back to the state was arduous, and in return, he should be receiving victims' compensation from the state. So that was fun to explain. I once had to explain what a maiden name was. They had no idea. Similarly, with a different client, I tried to explain why they needed to fill out the intake questionnaire. I was explaining that I need information such as their name, address, and date of birth in order to draft paperwork. Their response: "Why do I have to do this? What did I even hire you for? You're useless. If I have to do all this work I might as well represent myself." They were super pissed and stomped out the front door. Sorry, I don't magically know your date of birth. Edit. As for the maiden name, it was a very small country town. This person was most definitely a native English speaker. Bankruptcy attorney here. If you know you're coming to my office to file bankruptcy, do not make major financial decisions before you talk to me. For instance, cashing out your 401k, paying your family members the money you owe them, buying a car with no intention of paying off the loan, etc. The court allows you to discharge your debt and the only thing they ask is for you to be honest and not sneaky about it. You gotta respect the process. Represented a client charged with statutory rape who had a large number of explanations for the various evidence in his case that I had to explain would not be a good idea to testify to or argue to the jury. The Kai jelly you purchased with the kid at Walmart was not for applying to an undiagnosed skin condition on your chest. The hundreds of pages of internet chat logs prior to traveling hundreds of miles to meet the kid, consisting of repeated explicit sexual overtures, emotional manipulation, lies about your age and wealth, and specific plans for how you would remove him from his parents' home were not meaningless banter. The fact that you had an active prescription for Viagra does not mean you are asexual. The semen matching your DNA did not find its way into the rectum of the 13-year-old boy because of your medical condition that results in leakage, and the fact that when you are staying in a hotel room, you do not lift the toilet seat when you urinate, which must have resulted in the material being deposited on the seat and transferred to the boy when he sat on the seat. You were not the victim taken advantage of by the hypersexual teenager for whom you were merely trying to provide innocent emotional support. I had to explain all of these things and others many times. I'm not sure he ever actually believed any of them. that he hadn't really won a 20 million euros European super lottery from Australia that he'd never entered, and that it was a good thing that his family, bank, and church wouldn't lend him the $2,000 they said they needed to verify his identity, on top of the several hundred he'd already sent them, and that yes, his priest was right, it was a scam. This was during a clinic at a free community legal center. The poor guy had limited English and only $20 left in his bank account, and he really did not want to let go of the 20 million euro dream. His priest had sent him to us for advice because he wasn't having any luck talking sense into the old guy himself and thought lawyers might help. That they had to pay me. This is more common than you'd think. For some reason, some people think lawyers are like their personal spiritual guides or fairy godmother. When I was a legal intern at a criminal defender's law office, we had a client who was charged with murder. We explained to the client not to make any phone calls saying anything incriminating, because it will be recorded. Where prisoners can use the phone, there is a giant sign that says phone calls will be recorded. On top of that, before you are able to call there is an automated recording that tells you that all calls are being recorded and monitored, unless it is to your attorney, which are covered by privilege. Client made a call to his girlfriend that evening asking her to hide the gun. Edit. Just found out what happened to the case. Apparently it was dismissed. The defense attorney was really good. Edit 2. Because I think my previous edit infuriated a lot of people. Yeah, it sucks that a lot of criminals tend to get out on some BS technicalities, but a good criminal defense attorney will make sure that a prosecutor does their job properly too, and the case won't go up on appeal and get reversed on some other error. Also, I was just a lowly intern at the time. Stop sending me hate mail. A lawyer can't out and out lie. You said to them, yeah, I burned his ducking house down and pissed on the ashes. He can't say you were 2 states away. That blew some my students' heads. I recently had a call from a guy who found out that Long John Silver's was microwaving his baked shrimp combo. He wanted to eat there for every meal for a year and then sue them for false advertising. He changed his mind when I suggested that he would probably die of a heart attack before reaching his 1-year goal. Gotta appreciate that man's commitment though. Well, from the other side, I once missed a court date and assumed that had put me in even deeper legal trouble. My lawyer then had to explain to me that dodging his calls to avoid being arrested was just dumb and the exact wrong course of action. If it helps, we get it all the time, and the law profession is full of those with anxiety/depression, both issues that can make you want to avoid facing stuff. Personally, I totally get why my clients would avoid the shit of their problems. I hate opening my mail, but tell my clients on the regular not to avoid this. So your attorney didn't necessarily think you were an idiot. He would have just cringed at the hole he knew you were digging for yourself. I had to explain to a client why their ex-husband could travel with their child to Florida without obtaining a passport. As in, I had to tell them that Florida was part of the United States. When a client called me this past Memorial Day and I asked why she was calling me on a holiday, she replied that she didn't think Jews celebrated Memorial Day. Never thought that I would have to explain that to anyone. I once had to explain to opposing counsel that his entire argument was wrong because he had cited a statute for chattels not real property. It was a case involving a land contract. I used to be a legal aid lawyer, so sometimes I had sovereign citizens come in for help. I'd have to explain that their magic words wouldn't solve anything and they were going to get evicted. If they wouldn't agree to negotiate for settlement, I wouldn't represent them because they never had any real defenses and we didn't have the resources to litigate impossible cases. I had to argue against someone who claimed to have copyright law on their side for the opening of Bach's Cantata #140, Watch It Off. A pop instrumentalist arranged Bach's masterpiece, then claimed it as his own. After I played the original, there was zero doubt in the courtroom regarding who was the master and who was the imposter. I was contacted by a couple who had paid for a trip to see the midnight sun in northern Norway. They wanted to sue the travel agency when they found out it was the same sun as always. I had to explain that there's only a single sun and that they can't sue a travel agency for selling a midnight sun trip. I had a client once who was in trouble for stealing sample medications from a hospital. We got security footage from the DA as part of the evidence, and when it came down we watched it together. The camera was literally 10 feet away in a well-lit room, and we watched her shovel prescription samples into a garbage bag and walk off. After it was done she turned to me and asked if I thought she was going to be able to get off. I said no. I once had a client who wanted to declare bankruptcy. I explained he needed to have his tax returns for the past few years filed in order to do so. He said he hadn't filed taxes in 20 years because it ain't none of the government's business how much money I make. You've been visited by the masonry dog. You'll never deal with an earthquake or sinkhole if you comment. Lay the foundation, papa.